Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Alliterations. This one's kind of a special one. Get a bonus episode this month because this is the or today, uh, April 18th into the 19th, I guess technically, is the 250th anniversary of Paul Revere's Ride. Uh, Warning. Um, Continental soldiers, Americans, Patriot forces of the incoming British in Massachusetts, Lexington, Concord, 250 years. And so, as a, like I say, kind of a special treat, I'm going to reread the uh, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow poem, Paul Revere's Ride, and accompanied by this great little sketch of as a statue of Paul Revere, I would imagine in Massachusetts in Boston, but I guess I don't know that 100%. Um, so I'm grateful to have this guy to accompany me. Couldn't ask for a better reading and writing partner. And then I also will talk a little bit about one of the relatively few biographies uh, of Revere. But first, let's get into the poem. So this poem was published in 1860 uh, or 1861 by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow in the Atlantic. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, if the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church Tower as a signal light. One if by land, two if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm, for the country folk to be up and to arm. Then he said good night with a muffled oar, silently rowed to the Charlestown shore. Just as the moon rose over the bay, there swinging wide at her moorings lay the Somerset British man o' war, a phantom ship, with each mast and spar across the moon like a prison bar, and a huge black hulk that was magnified by its own reflection in the tide. Meanwhile, his friend through the alley and street wanders and watches with eager ears, till in the silence around him he hears the muster of men at the black barrack door, the sound of arms and the tramp of feet, and the measured tread of the grenadiers marching down to their boats to the shore. Then he climbed to the tower of the church, up the wooden stairs with stealthy tread, to the belfry chamber overhead, and startled the pigeons from their perch on the sombre rafters that round him made masses and moving shapes of shade. Up the light ladder, slender and tall, to the highest window in the wall, where he paused to listen and look down a moment on the roofs of the town, and the moonlights flowing over all. Beneath in the churchyard lay the dead in the night encampment on the hill, wrapped in silence so deep and still that he could hear like a sentinel's tread the watchful night wind as it went, creeping along from tent to tent, seeming to whisper all is well. A moment only he feels the spell of the place and the hour, the secret dread of the lonely belfry and the dead. For suddenly all his thoughts are bent shadowy something far away, where the river widens to meet the bay, a line of black bends and floats on the rising tide like a bridge of boats. Meanwhile, impatient to mount and ride, booted and spurred with a heavy stride, on the opposite shore walked Paul Revere. Now he patted his horse's side, now gazed on the landscape far and near. then impetuous stamped the earth, and turned and tightened his saddle girth. But mostly he watched with eager search the belfry tower of the old North Church, as it rose above the graves on the hill, lonely and spectral and sombre and still. And lo, as he looks on the belfry site, a glimmer, and then the gleam of light. He springs to the saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes till full in his sight a second lamp in the belfry burns. A hurry of hoofs in a village street, a shape in the moonlight, a bulk in the dark, and beneath from the pebbles in passing a spark, struck out by a steed that flies fearless and fleet. That was all, and yet through the gloom and the light, the fate of a nation was riding that night, and the spark struck out by the steed in his flight kindled the land into the flame in its heat. It was 12 by the village clock, and then he crossed the bridge to Medford towns. He heard the crowing of the cock and barking on the farmer's dog, and he felt the damp of the river fog that rises when the sun goes down. It was 1 by the village clock when he rode to Lexington. He saw the gilded weathercock swim in the moonlight as he passed, and the meeting-house windows, blank and bare, gaze at him with a spectral glare, as if they had already stood aghast at the bloody work that they would look upon. It was 2 by the village clock when he came to the bridge in Concord town. He heard the bleating of the clock and the twitter of birds among the trees, and felt the breath of the morning breeze blowing over the meadows brown. And one was safe and asleep in his bed, who at the bridge would be first to fall, who that day would be lying dead, pierced by a British musket ball. You know the rest. In the books you have read how the British regulars fired and fled, how the farmers gave them a ball for ball, from behind each fence and farmyard wall, chasing the redcoats down the lane, and crossing the fields to emerge again, under the trees at the turn of the road, and only pausing to fire and load. So through the night rode Paul Revere, and so thought the night when his cry of alarm to every Middlesex village and farm, a cry of defiance and not of fear, a voice in the darkness, a knock at the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore. For born to the night on the night wind of the past, through all history to the last. In the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will awaken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeat of that steed and the midnight message of Paul Revere. And end of poem. What a great little poem that is. It's relatively short, but dozen stanzas or so. Obviously, here the first stanza. Relatively often listen, my children, you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere, and so on. We hear that periodically. TV shows and movies and whatnot. Might mention it in passing. I think there's a Andy Griffith episode that mentions it. But you rarely hear about the rest of the poem. And I'll admit too that it's been a while since I had read the entirety of that poem. I always liked Longfellow, but it's just not something you necessarily hear particularly often. And of course, he takes some artistic liberties. That's the way it goes. But the broad strokes of the poem and the history it recites are accurate. One thing that really surprised me is that how before that poem, came to be and was published and was well received and republished multiple times and for the next couple of years in the early 1860s. Before that, Paul Revere was not a well-known individual. He's somebody that we know much more about today than people in the early republic would have known about. It's not that Paul Revere's ride wasn't important. Obviously, it really was, and it wasn't necessarily that it was forgotten or anything like that, but it didn't have the same cultural resonance as it does today. And so I thought that was really interesting. And he's a American hero that everybody should know about, and most everybody can look up to. Silversmith, who took it upon himself to warn his countrymen of invasion and in fight against tyranny. That's an admirable feat, and that's something that I think we can all learn from in today's day and age. There isn't a ton of scholarship about Paul Revere. He's he unfortunately does not get the same amount of attention as other figures from that era. Washington, Jefferson, Adams, Henry Knox, Albert Gallatin, people like that. Or even on the British side, Henry Clinton and people like that. But I do have one biography of his that I'll mention. It's a biography, so it's nonfiction. We usually talk about fiction. It's the poem and not the biography. But I would recommend checking it out. It's an much older book. In 1942 it was published. But one of the few biographies of Revere I get my hands on by Esther Forbes. Paul Revere and the World He Lived In. It's a little bit. It's about Paul Revere and it's about Paul Revere's life. It's a little bit also about a social history of 1760s, 1770s, 80s, Boston, Massachusetts, and then the continent as a whole. But worthwhile checking out for sure. And so with that, I'll leave you and I'll link the poem down below. So if you want to read it or come back to it. Especially in today's day and age, it can seem difficult to take pride in the America that we live in or the figures that dominate our sphere. But remember that we have a long and storied history as Americans, filled with people of all shades of good and bad and gray. I'm not going to say Paul Revere was perfect, but I do believe he was. He is somebody that we can look up to, and his determination to serve his nation is an admirable quality. And especially as we face down tyranny today, we can think about how we as Americans, as everyday citizens, as a tech writer, as a silversmith, as a nurse, as a teacher, as a welder, as a whatever you are, how can we serve our nation? And how can we protect the United States of America? So I'll leave you with that message and let you ponder that a little bit. Thank you for tuning in. Next month, we'll find out what we're discussing next month. Come back again, like and subscribe. Thank you.